Prince William thought he understood the weight waiting for him, but one sealed letter changed the meaning of everything. Hidden inside the palace archives, marked with the Queen's private cipher, the final message was not ceremonial. It was personal, direct, and devastatingly clear. When William read the words meant only for him, the future of the monarchy no longer felt distant. It felt immediate. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William entered the room with the controlled calm of a man trained never to show surprise. Yet the silence waiting for him felt different from the beginning. A senior archivist placed a sealed folder before him and lowered his eyes, as if even touching it had carried a burden. The palace archives, the private collection of letters, records, and personal papers, kept to preserve royal history, had been opened for a formal review of the Queen's correspondence. During that review, the archivists uncovered her final private letter, addressed directly to William, and the restriction mark on the folder meant only a small circle had ever been allowed near it. The prince did not rush. He broke the seal with care, turned the first page, and stopped. The handwriting was hers. The slant of each word, the measured pressure of the pen, the quiet discipline in every line. It brought the monarch back into the room with such force that he forgot, for one breath, where he was. William read the opening sentence once, then again, and his expression changed. This was not a grandmother offering comfort. This was the Queen naming him the emotional guardian of the crown before he ever wore it. Charles heard the news moments later, and the king's face tightened before anyone finished speaking. He understood what the crown meant, not just jewels or ceremony, but the living symbol of monarchy, duty, family, and national trust. The letter spoke to William with a directness that no father could easily ignore. It did not remove Charles. It did not challenge him, but it reached past him, and that made the silence around the king feel sharper than any accusation. William kept reading, and the truth grew heavier. The Queen had not written as someone closing a chapter. She had written as someone warning him that his role would arrive emotionally before it arrived constitutionally. Constitutional duty meant the formal legal order of monarchy, but her words reached deeper than law. She was telling him that one day he would have to steady the family when the family itself became the danger. Then came the final line. William's hand lowered slightly, and every person in the room felt the shift. The Queen had seen fractures forming long before others admitted they existed, and she had chosen him to contain them when the moment came. He set the letter down without speaking. The question was no longer what she had written. The question was why she had hidden it until now. But before William could understand the true meaning of the Queen's words, the palace had to face the people those words would quietly unsettle. The letter did not arrive in an empty room. It landed inside a family already carrying grief, rivalry, loyalty, and suspicion. William was not just a prince reading his grandmother's final message. Charles was not just a king hearing old instructions return. Camilla, Catherine, and Anne each understood that one private sentence from the Queen could shift the emotional balance of the entire palace. William stood at the center of it all, but not with triumph. He carried the letter like a man holding something heavier than paper. The future king had always known duty would find him one day, but this was different. The Queen had not written to him as a distant successor. She had framed him as the stabilizing force, the one steady presence she trusted when others faltered. That mattered, because the monarchy was not held together by crowns alone. It survived through trust, restraint, and the quiet belief that someone inside the family could still place duty above personal pain. Charles understood that truth immediately, and it cut deeper than anyone dared admit. The king had spent his life waiting, learning, preparing, and enduring judgment from every side. Yet now his mother's final guidance had gone straight to William, with a clarity he himself had never received in that same way. He did not rage, he did not accuse. He simply looked at the folded pages and felt the ache of a son, realizing that even in death, The monarch had measured the future differently than he expected. William felt the pull from both sides. Loyalty to Charles demanded silence, respect, and care. Loyalty to the Queen demanded courage, discipline, and acceptance. The prince knew his father was wounded, but he also knew his grandmother had not written those words lightly. She had shaped him through small lessons, careful warnings, and private moments that never reached the public. Now all of it had returned at once. Not as memory, as command. Catherine saw the crack before anyone else. She watched William fold the letter, then press his thumb against the Queen's signature, as if trying to hold himself together. The princess understood him, without needing an explanation. His face remained controlled, but his grief had shifted. He was no longer mourning only the woman he loved. He was facing the burden she had left behind, and that burden now stood between father, son, and crown. Anne read only a short extract, but it was enough. The princess did not soften her expression, because she understood the language of duty too well. The Queen was not preparing William for public appearances or ceremonial speeches. She was preparing him for palace resistance. That meant conflict from within, pressure from trusted rooms, and moments when family loyalty would become the very thing testing royal judgment. Camilla sensed it too, though she said little. The Queen consort understood influence, and she understood when influence began to narrow. If William was now seen as the Queen's chosen moral anchor, then every future decision he touched would carry her shadow behind it. That was power without announcement, authority without a title change, a silent shift no one could easily challenge. Then the archivists revealed the detail that changed the temperature of the room. The letter had not been written at random. It had followed one specific incident, one buried moment everyone had tried to forget. And that buried incident would prove this letter was not a farewell. It was a warning. Every royal storm has a first crack, and this one began on a night no one outside the palace was ever meant to remember. A private Windsor dinner, a closed door, and one tense exchange changed the Queen's view of the future. What happened that evening did not explode publicly, but inside the monarchy, it became the moment everything quietly turned toward William. William had entered that dinner expecting strain, not history. The earlier family briefing had already left the palace unsettled, because the subject was not a single event but the long-term direction of the crown. A briefing, in palace terms, meant a private meeting where senior royals and trusted advisors discussed sensitive decisions before they reached the public. That night, the discussion had moved beyond schedules and appearances. It touched authority, influence, access, and the question no one wanted to say too loudly: who would steady the monarchy when the next storm arrived? Charles felt the pressure immediately. The king had spent decades preparing for duty. Yet William's calm firmness sounded to him like a quiet judgment. The prince did not raise his voice. He did not seek control. He simply argued that the monarchy could not survive if personal comfort came before public trust. That mattered because every royal decision carried two costs: what it protected and what it exposed. William understood that success in the crown often meant suffering inside the family, and Charles heard that truth as if it had been aimed straight at him. The Queen watched more than she spoke. She saw William defend duty with the same restraint she had once demanded of herself, and she saw others pull the conversation toward access, influence, and private advantage. Anne noticed the monarch's silence first. The princess knew that when her mother grew quiet, it was never emptiness. It was judgment gathering weight. Across the table, William struggled to hide how shaken he was, because loyalty to Charles still mattered, even while the prince felt forced to defend a future his father had not fully accepted. Charles read William's restraint as distance, and that wounded him more than open anger would have. He looked at his son and saw not rebellion, but something harder to fight: conviction. The Queen saw it too. She understood that William was not trying to rise above his father. He was trying to protect the institution before personal weakness could reach it. In that moment, the monarch seemed to understand that the future would not be saved by affection alone. It would require someone willing to be misunderstood. The queen left the room with Anne before the night had settled. The princess walked beside her, saying little, while the monarch carried the full weight of what she had witnessed. Later, the queen asked for her private writing case, the small locked box she used for deeply personal correspondence. A palace aide later recalled the moment in a documented internal account, remembering how she sealed the envelope herself, refused assistance, and said only that William would understand when the time came. That letter was not born from ceremony. It was born from concern, from disappointment, and from the knowledge that the crown's next guardian might have to stand alone. Because once Charles learned what his mother had written, grief gave way to something sharper. The confrontation did not happen in public. It happened in the kind of room where royal voices are expected to stay low, even when hearts are breaking. Charles asked to see William alone, without aides, without secretaries, without anyone to soften the silence. On the table between them lay the Queen's final letter, and neither man could pretend it was just paper. Charles had read the Archivist's summary twice before sending for his son. The words had landed with the force of a private judgment, not because they attacked him, but because they revealed something he had not been ready to face. The sitting room chosen for the meeting was not listed in the official diary, the daily record of royal appointments that normally protects order, timing, and public accountability. This conversation existed outside that structure. It was not a palace appointment. It was a father and a son meeting beneath the shadow of a woman both had loved, feared, and obeyed. William arrived knowing the room had already chosen its mood. He looked at Charles, then at the letter, and understood that grief had changed shape. The king did not begin with anger, he began with hurt. Why would the queen write such words to William? Why would she name him as the steady hand, the emotional guardian, the one who must protect the crown when protection required distance? Charles asked it quietly, but quietness made it worse. Every word carried the ache of a son still seeking his mother's confidence. William answered with care, because victory would have been cruel. The prince did not lift the letter like proof. He did not claim authority over Charles. He said the message had stunned him, not strengthened him. He said it felt less like power and more like a burden he had never asked to inherit early. His voice broke on the last word, and the break changed everything. Charles saw then that William was not celebrating the Queen's trust. He was bleeding under it. Charles pushed the letter across the table until it stopped at the sentence neither man could escape. The Queen had written that the crown must be protected, even when protection requires distance. The crown, in this meaning, was not just a jeweled object or a title. It was the whole burden of monarchy, the family, the public trust, the duty, and the fragile belief that restraint could survive pain. William read the sentence again and felt the hidden warning open beneath it. William understood what his grandmother had seen. She had anticipated a day when loyalty to family and loyalty to monarchy would collide so sharply that love alone would not be enough. Charles understood it too, and that made the silence between them almost unbearable. The king stood first, his face closed but wounded. The prince remained seated for one more breath, then took the letter with him. That choice spoke louder than either man's words. From that closed room, the question moved beyond emotion and into the machinery of royal power. A royal letter can be sentimental, but this one carried more than feeling. It carried intent. The Archivists did not simply find a private message from a grandmother to her grandson. They uncovered a written instruction that palace figures could no longer ignore. As the document passed through careful hands, William's emotional burden became something far more dangerous: recognized authority. William had left the private confrontation with Charles carrying more than a letter. He carried the sound of his father's silence, the wound in the king's eyes, and the terrible knowledge that the Queen's words had changed the balance between love and duty. Senior archivists confirmed that the document had been catalogued among her personal end-of-reign papers, a guarded collection of private writings gathered near the close of a monarch's life. That mattered, because papers placed there were not casual notes. They were preserved as part of the Queen's final understanding of the crown, and this letter now sat among them like a quiet command. palace advisors began reviewing what it meant, and the room around William seemed to tighten with every careful phrase. Advisors, in this world, were not simply office staff. They were trusted figures who helped guide royal decisions before they reached the public, especially when family feeling and national duty became tangled. Their questions moved quickly. Should William be brought into more private briefings? Should his voice carry more weight in family decisions? Should his preparation for the future now be treated as something already active, rather than distant? Each question sounded practical. Each one cut deeper. Anne watched the process with stern sadness, and the princess understood why her mother had done it. The queen had trusted William out of love, yes, but also out of concern. That was the painful part. And trust should have felt like honor, but here it felt like a warning wrapped in affection. Anne knew the monarch had not written lightly. She had seen weakness where others saw manners, danger where others saw discomfort, and pressure building behind doors that still looked calm from the outside. Catherine saw the change in William before anyone named it. The prince grew quieter as each advisor treated the letter less like comfort and more like an instruction he now had to carry. She understood the cost of that shift. A blessing can lift a person, but a command can isolate him. William was being praised and burdened in the same breath, pulled forward by the queen's confidence while still grieving the woman who had placed it on him. Then one line altered the room completely. The letter described William as the steady hand after the storm, and no one could pretend those words were soft. The phrase did not sound decorative. It sounded chosen. It placed him beyond ceremony, beyond sympathy, beyond simple succession. It suggested the queen had seen a storm coming and had marked the person she believed could hold the monarchy together when others could not. One archivist then revealed the final restriction that made everyone stop. The queen had personally requested that the letter remain sealed until after the crown had entered its next chapter, meaning after the monarchy had moved into a new reign and the pressures she feared had begun to show themselves. William heard it and understood the cruelty of the timing. She had not hidden the letter because it was unimportant. She had hidden it because its meaning would only become clear when the palace was already under strain. Once the queen's words were acknowledged, every old arrangement inside the palace began to tremble. The fallout began quietly, but quiet does not mean harmless. A changed briefing list, a delayed meeting, a door that no longer opened as easily as before. Inside the palace, consequences often arrive without announcement, and everyone understands them anyway. For William, the Queen's letter became a silent force. For others, it became proof that the future had started moving without permission. William felt the shift before anyone dared describe it openly. One morning, his name appeared on a private strategic briefing that had once belonged only to the most senior decision-makers. A strategic briefing meant a confidential meeting where future royal choices were discussed before they became public actions. And this one carried more weight than ordinary planning. It dealt with family unity, public trust, and the fragile question of how the monarchy could survive the pressures forming inside its own walls. William did not celebrate the invitation. He understood what it meant. The Queen's final message was no longer resting in an archive. It was changing practice. Advisors treated him differently from the moment he entered the conversation. They no longer asked for his view as a distant heir who might one day decide. They asked as if his judgment already mattered to the stability of the crown. That mattered because royal influence rarely arrives with a public announcement. It arrives through access, through papers placed before one person instead of another, through the quiet decision that one voice must now be heard before the palace moves. William listened carefully, but each respectful pause around him felt like another piece of weight being lowered onto his shoulders. Camilla learned of the altered briefing structure after a door had already closed without her. The queen consort did not need a dramatic explanation to understand the message. She had spent enough years inside royal life to know when a room had shifted away from her. William's influence had gained a new moral shield, and that shield came from the queen herself. Camilla sat alone, with the knowledge that opposing him now would not look like resisting a son. It would look like resisting the monarch's final trust. Charles carried the wound differently. The king grew quieter, not because he lacked pride in William, but because pride had become tangled with pain. His son was rising in the eyes of the palace, and part of him admired it. Another part could not escape the sting of being measured by his mother's confidence in someone else. Charles knew the queen had loved him, yet the letter made him face a harsher truth. Love and trust were not always the same thing. Then came the smallest movement with the greatest meaning. A palace secretary removed one confidential folder from a general circulation tray and redirected it to William's office under new instruction. No speech followed. No announcement explained it. But the inner circle understood. The letter's existence had spread among a tiny group, and silence became its own announcement. William saw the folder arrive and felt no victory. He felt the walls closing in around a future that had suddenly stepped closer. The Queen's words had become action. The palace had begun to rearrange itself around them. Yet the true turning point would not come from advisors, folders, or closed meetings. It would come when William finally faced the one person who could see the burden beneath the title. And when William finally turned to Catherine, the burden stopped being royal and became painfully human. Away from advisors, titles, and palace language, William finally let the weight show. Catherine did not ask for a briefing. She did not ask for strategy. She watched the man behind the role sit with the Queen's letter in his hands, and in that quiet moment, the future stopped feeling like an institution. It became a family promise, fragile and heavy. William had carried the letter through rooms where every word was measured, every pause studied, and every reaction hidden beneath royal control. But with Catherine, the mask did not hold. He brought the letter to her because she was the only person who could hear both voices inside him, the prince trained for duty and the husband shaken by grief. That mattered because succession was not only about who came next. Succession meant the planned passing of royal responsibility from one generation to another, and the Queen's message had turned that future into something painfully personal. Catherine understood before he explained. She knew the letter was not simply about thrones, ceremonies, or the distant day when William would wear the crown. It was about endurance. It was about surviving royal storms without becoming hard, carrying public trust without losing private tenderness, and protecting a family that could wound itself from within. The princess had seen William steady others for years, but now, she saw how deeply the Queen's confidence had unsettled him. Praise had become pressure. Love had become command. William admitted the truth quietly. He was stunned, but not by the honor. He was stunned by the loneliness hidden inside it. The Queen had not written as though he would be surrounded by certainty. She had written as though he might one day stand between duty and damage, between family affection and royal survival. The prince did not sound proud when he said it. He sounded almost wounded, as if his grandmother had seen a burden in him before he had found the strength to name it. Catherine took the letter and read one line in silence. She did not rush to comfort him. She did not pretend the words were softer than they were. Instead, she reached for his hand, and that simple act carried more truth than any palace speech. The princess understood that some burdens should not be erased. They should be shared. William looked at her then and began to see the letter differently, not as a demand to replace anyone, but as a warning to protect what others might damage. Catherine gave him the clearest words of the entire ordeal. She told him the letter was not a crown before its time. It was a compass for the years when the path became unclear. William heard that, and something returned to his face. Not ease, not relief, strength. The Queen's message still hurt, but it no longer stood over him like a sentence. It stood beside him like guidance. Yet outside that private space, the walls of silence were already weakening. Too many people had seen the altered briefings. Too many careful movements had betrayed the truth. The palace could control the wording, but not the meaning. Something extraordinary had been found, and the world was about to feel its force. What began as a sealed palace discovery was now impossible to keep completely hidden from the world. By morning, the story no longer belonged only to the palace. It belonged to a country trained to read meaning in every royal silence. The public did not see the full letter, but they saw enough: the timing, the faces, the sudden change in tone. A private message from the late Queen had become a national mirror, reflecting fear, loyalty, grief, and expectation. William had known the silence would not hold forever. Too many doors had shifted, too many briefings had changed, and too many people had begun speaking in careful half-sentences. When palace communications finally confirmed that a private letter from the Queen to William had been archived and acknowledged, the wording was controlled, but the impact was not. Palace communications meant the official team responsible for public royal statements, and their carefully chosen language mattered because every word carried risk. They did not release the full text. They did not explain every sentence. They only confirmed enough to make the public understand that something deeply personal had been found. Catherine stood close to William during a scheduled engagement, and the country noticed. The prince remained composed, yet there was a heaviness about him that no polished smile could fully hide. He greeted people, answered kindly, and carried himself with the restraint expected of a future king. But the letter had changed the way people looked at him. They no longer saw only preparation. They saw pressure. Catherine understood that pressure and stayed near him with quiet support, not to speak for him, but to steady the space around him. Charles watched the coverage from inside the palace and felt the comparison forming before anyone dared say it aloud. The king turned the sound down, but the images still carried their own message. William was being framed as the Queen's final trusted figure, and Charles could not escape the ache of that. He loved his son. He respected the burden placed on him. Yet pride and pain sat together uneasily, because the public was now reading the Queen's confidence as a verdict on the future. Then came the front page that gave the moment its national shape. A major newspaper placed a large image of William beneath the headline, "The Queen's Final Trust," with a smaller inset of the sealed archive folder beside it. A front page mattered because it turned a palace matter into public memory, fixing one private discovery into a single phrase millions could repeat. The headline did not reveal the full letter, but it did something more powerful. It told the country how to feel about it. Outside Buckingham Palace, the reaction became quiet but unmistakable. A small crowd gathered near the gates, some holding flowers for the late Queen, others speaking in low voices about William carrying her last command. Buckingham Palace, the central working home of the monarchy in London, had become the place where private grief met public expectation. People were not celebrating scandal. They were watching a transfer of trust. They sensed that the Queen's final message had reached beyond family walls and touched the national idea of continuity. William understood the danger in that attention. Public sympathy could lift him, but it could also trap him. The more the country saw him as the Queen's chosen moral anchor, the less room he had to stumble, hesitate, or grieve like an ordinary man. Catherine knew it too. Charles knew it painfully. The palace had acknowledged the letter, the world had reacted, and now the final meaning depended on what William chose to become after reading it. And in the end, the Queen's final letter did not simply reveal William's future. It defined the man he would have to be. The letter did not crown William. It did something more intimate, more painful, and more powerful. It named the burden before the throne. It told him that leadership begins long before the moment of accession, in silence, restraint, sacrifice, and judgment. By the time the palace absorbed its meaning, no one could deny the truth. The Queen had seen William's future before he was ready to face it. William stood at the center of a monarchy that had quietly changed around him. Nothing in the formal order had shifted. No title had been rewritten. No public declaration had raised him above the place already set for him. Yet everyone inside the palace understood that his role had become unmistakable. The moment of accession, the formal point when an heir becomes monarch, still belonged to the future, but the emotional weight of leadership had already reached him. That mattered, because monarchy survives not only through law, but through confidence, and the Queen's final trust had placed that confidence directly on his shoulders. Charles accepted that truth with visible difficulty. The king had not been rejected by his mother's words, but he had been forced to face what they meant. The Queen had trusted William, not because she loved Charles less, but because she believed the monarchy would one day need a steadier hand in a more dangerous hour. That was the wound and the mercy of it. Charles could feel the sting of comparison, but he could also see the protection hidden beneath it. His mother had not written to divide father and son. She had written to preserve the crown when emotion threatened to weaken duty. William read the letter one final time before returning it to its secure folder. A secure folder meant a protected royal file kept away from general access, reserved only for those allowed to handle the most sensitive private papers. The prince no longer looked stunned. He looked quieter, older, and more resolved. The words had wounded him first, then steadied him. The true revelation was not that he had been chosen for power. It was that the Queen believed he could survive the loneliness that power would bring. Catherine's presence made that truth bearable. She had seen the burden behind William's silence, and she had not tried to turn it into glory. The princess understood that his future would not be shaped by duty alone, but by partnership, memory, and the strength to remain human while carrying something larger than himself. William would not walk toward the throne as a solitary figure trapped by expectation. He would move forward with someone who understood both the man and the mission. The palace crossed a private threshold that day. The Queen's final letter moved from memory into action, and William accepted that his future role was not waiting for him someday. It had already begun. The Queen's final letter closed one chapter of royal history, but it left behind a verdict no one inside the palace could escape. William was no longer merely preparing for the future. He had become its keeper. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.